All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into the really strange story of Japan's lost decades, a 30-year economic saga that was so weird, it literally forced economists to rethink what a crisis even is.
So let's just start with a puzzle that has been stumping experts for years. Japan's economy completely crashed, but its society didn't. You'd expect chaos, but instead there was calm. You'd expect a revolution, but instead there was this incredible resilience. The big question is, how?
Just to get a sense of the scale here, I want you to imagine the stock market, the very engine of a country's wealth, losing 80% of its value. That's an entire generation of investment just poof, wiped out. And then, on top of that, imagine the property market basically vanishing. Commercial real estate in big cities like Tokyo, which was once the most expensive on planet Earth, saw its value crash by a staggering 87%. The very foundation of wealth for families and companies, it just crumbled. And this right here is the central question we're tackling. How on earth does a country go through a crisis that spans decades, something that would have absolutely shattered most other nations, and yet somehow continue to function as one of the world's most advanced, safe, and stable societies? Well, the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think.
Okay, so to really understand the crash, we have to rewind the clock. We've got to go back to the dizzying heights of the 1980s. This was the era of Japan Inc., a time when the nation was this unstoppable economic titan, and it seemed totally destined to become the world's #1 superpower. So, where did it all start? Well, a lot of it kicked off with an international currency deal called the Plaza Accord. It was designed to weaken the US dollar, but a huge side effect was that it flooded Japan with incredibly cheap money. And that just lit a rocket under Japan's stock market, the Nikkei. It went on an absolute tear, quintupling in just 5 years. The mood? It was just pure euphoria. And this quote, oh man, it just perfectly captures the absolute insanity of the bubble. And no, this wasn't some funny exaggeration. At the time, analysts were seriously calculating that the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than every single piece of property in the entire state of California. The numbers had completely, totally disconnected from anything resembling reality. It was pure speculative fever.
So you see, this wasn't just a little market excitement. Nope, it was the perfect storm. You had a flood of cheap credit, people and companies borrowing insane amounts of money to pour into assets that only seemed to go up, and this wave of national confidence that saw Japanese companies buying up iconic global landmarks left and right.
But you know how this story goes, right? Every bubble eventually has to pop. And when Japan's did, the sound echoed all around the world, and it kicked off a totally new and much darker economic chapter for the country. The party came to a screeching halt. The Bank of Japan got spooked. They were worried the bubble was creating runaway inflation, so they slammed on the brakes hard. They jacked up interest rates. The cheap money vanished, and the market just fell off a cliff. In less than 1 year, the Nikkei was cut almost in half. You know, when you look back at it, the warning signs were just everywhere, flashing bright red. So for context, a typical price-to-earnings ratio for a stock market is, let's say, around 15 or 20. Japan's was over 60. That's 3 times the norm. But in the middle of all that frenzy, who cared about fundamentals? The animal spirits of the market were just too powerful. The crash itself was brutal, but it was really just the beginning of the pain. The real problem, the deep-down issue, was the economic disease that took hold right after, a kind of sickness that would paralyze Japan for decades to come. Think about it like this. Imagine you're a gardener, but you refuse to pull up any of your dead plants. Those dead plants, the zombie companies, are kept alive with loans they can never, ever repay from zombie banks. They just sit there, taking up soil, water, and sunlight, and they prevent any new healthy plants from growing. Well, that's basically what happened to Japan's entire economy. And this is how Japan got stuck in this vicious cycle, this trap it just couldn't escape. To keep from collapsing, banks just pretended their bad loans were actually fine, but that meant all their money was tied up so they couldn't lend to new, innovative companies. So the old, inefficient zombie companies were kept on life support, which dragged down the whole economy's productivity. And that led to a situation where nobody wanted to spend any money. And that last part, deflation, that is pure poison for an economy. It's the exact opposite of inflation. I mean, think about it. Why would you buy a car or a new TV today if you know it's going to be cheaper next month? You wouldn't, right?
Now multiply that decision by millions of people and businesses, and the entire economy just seizes up.
Now, you might be thinking, what were Japan's leaders doing all this time? Well, they weren't just sitting around. They threw literally everything they had at this problem, the entire modern economic playbook, again and again. But for decades, nothing seemed to move the needle.
And this just shows you how incredibly frustrating the whole thing was. I mean, look at this. They tried it all. They cut interest rates all the way to zero. They basically invented a policy we now call quantitative easing, or QE, printing money to pump into the economy. They spent trillions on government stimulus projects. And what was the result after decades of trying? The same thing, over and over. Less than 1% growth.
In all that government spending, it came with a huge side effect. To pay for all these stimulus projects, and a lot of them were criticized as these infamous bridges to nowhere, the government had to borrow a lot. They took on so much debt that their national debt to GDP ratio soared past 200%, the highest in the developed world. Because at the end of the day, no amount of printed money or government spending could fix the real problems, the deep structural stuff. Japan was aging fast. Its corporate culture, with lifetime employment, was great for stability but terrible for innovation. And the psychological scar of the crash was so deep that everyone, people and companies, just wanted to hoard cash instead of spending or investing it.
So why should we care about this? I mean, it's a 30-year-old crisis in Japan, right? Well, because Japan's story, it might not just be about the past. It could be a glimpse into the future for a lot of other major economies. Which brings us all the way back to our original question. How did Japan survive this? And the answer, when you boil it all down, is that it went into this crisis being incredibly, stupendously wealthy. The immense savings and assets that were built up during those boom years acted like a giant shock absorber for the whole society.
And this is the part of the story that's so crucial, the social side. Because here's the crazy thing. Unlike almost every other major economic crisis in history, there was no mass unemployment. The country's social fabric and its culture of lifetime employment, even if it was inefficient, it prevented widespread joblessness and all the social unrest that usually comes with it. But, and this is a huge but, that stability came at a massive cost. An entire generation grew up with pretty much zero economic growth. Now, living standards didn't collapse, but they sure didn't get any better. All that dynamism and optimism from the boom years, it was replaced by this feeling of a permanent managed decline.
And that leaves us with this massive question, one that's super relevant today. As other big economies around the world face their own problems with aging populations and mountains of debt, is Japan a cautionary tale, a warning of what to avoid at all costs? Or is it, weirdly, a model for how to manage a long, slow stagnation without totally falling apart? The answer to that could very well define the 21st century.